But then in the paragraph, he does not discuss omniscience, he discusses holiness, which I think is the focus. And he could tie that to omniscience somehow, but there is no tie here. So I would just change that topic sentence to reflect what the paragraph is really about. And then if he wants to make that connection, to draw that out more fully, or to draw it out at all, it's really not there as is. Here he does get into the seraphim, what they're doing, crying holy, holy, holy. So this would be the better discussion back where he's made the connection between the seraphim and the people. So this could be restructured a little bit to focus on the holiness and their role around the throne of God. He does a good job of making it clear that holy, holy, holy is about God's complete holiness, not about the Trinity, which I've heard this argued that this is the Trinity in view lots of times, so I appreciated that he made that clear and that he addressed that, since that's a common misconception, I think.
Was the support for that adequate in the paper?
Let me see.
Or could it be bolstered?
It could be strengthened a little bit. It's there. He refers to Revelation 4:8, and he says that this is describing the ultimate and transcendent holiness of God.
Does he have Jeremiah?
No, it could be strengthened.
When they say the temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord, temple
Right.
of the Lord, most people, no one will claim they're talking about Trinity there.
Right.
You know, so the troika being used for a complete planar kind of dependency was defined by 3 points, I think would be significant.
Good point.
Is holy, holy, holy used elsewhere to refer to the Trinity?
I think the connection is because later God says, who will go for us, who will we send, who will go for us, and so I think people connect the holy, holy, holy with the use of the first common plural and say that this is the Trinity speaking. I think that's where the misconception gets stronger,
Right,
because they
right.
think that's what they're seeing. So, but your question was, is holy, holy, holy elsewhere to refer to the Trinity? Not that I know of.
And you know, in the Psalm, holy, 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 God in 3 persons.
It's in the
blessed
song,
Trinity.
but not the Bible.
You ever heard the Mormon version of that?
You mentioned.
I mentioned
They,
that.
they say, instead of God in 3 persons, they say God in His glory.
Oh.
And they don't say Blessed Trinity, they say something else. Yeah. I mean, it reinforces it in people's minds, 'cause that's one of those
Right.
famous Christian hymns of all time.
Just rings in your mind.
That's just very bad Hebrew exegesis, you know. I don't want to put that on our path. I mean, we know that God is in 3 persons, but you can't just start reading it into every. And the troika in Hebrew is, you know, complete is very well established.
Any other comments on this section? Nope.
Nope.
Okay. So the next section, he makes some good connections with the Lord of Hosts. He talks about Joshua 10:11 and 2 Kings 7:3-11. Let me see what I wanted to look at.
Joy, if I can interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Are you going from the only, you're evaluating the only paper that he submitted, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, which still was missing a
It's-
couple.
Yes, it wasn't finished.
Okay, all right.
And
okay.
he hasn't sent any updates, so whatever you have is the only thing that was ever sent.
Okay.
So you're with us. So let's see, at the bottom of page 6, he says, the Lord is presented here as the Lord of armies to explain that as the architect of the universe, he can use anything to apply his judgment. For instance, Joshua 10:11 shows that God throws stones from heaven and killed the enemies of the Israelites, even killed more of his enemies than the people of Israel did. Also, in order to deliver the people of Israel from the Syrian siege, the Lord made the Syrian army hear the noises of horses and chariots, even great horses. So he draws a few connections that show God really intervening in the battles of man. So I like that. I thought that was good. But he says that the Lord of Hosts is mentioned to show that God can use anything to apply his judgment. I'm not sure I buy that. I think it's about the hosts. I think it's about not what he's using, even though these are interesting things that he uses, but his sovereignty over the hosts, the battles, the whole picture. And then I thought that this is where I think it would be critical to tie the passage into the political scene, to the world scene. Because what's happening with Assyria, the exile, the things that have already happened in Israel, what's coming for Judah. So I think that the reason the Lord of Hosts is in view, rather than some other quality of God, is because of that. Again, king's dead, earthly king is gone, we've got a heavenly king, what's he going to do? He's Lord of Hosts, he's going to fight our battles, etc. Except in this case, of course, they are going to go into exile, but they have to trust the Lord of Hosts. So I would draw that out. I would make those connections. And also this is chapter 7 and 8 are where, we're going to see this start to play out immediately, the political scene and all the things that are about to come. So this is a lead-in to that, I would think. Any comments on that?
Makes sense.
You buy that? Okay.
Yeah, so he translated Lord Almighty instead of Lord of Hosts on his translation.
Is that in his translation?
His
Okay.
translation, well, let me see. My NIV is Lord Almighty. His translation is Lord of Hosts. There definitely is some of both. Let's see about this.
So it is Lord of Hosts in Hebrew, right?
It's
Mhm.
definitely that in Hebrew, yeah, he
That's what I
translated
thought.
Lord of Hosts.
Okay, so
Makes
there's
sense. I was just saying NIV is Lord Almighty and
Thank you. Okay. So we were just talking about the reference to the Lord of Hosts, and that Fadinel gives some good examples of Lord of Hosts, but I was suggesting that he tie this into the political scene and
Yeah.
the coming Assyrian invasion.
Yeah.
And this is right before chapters 7 and 8, where we have Ahaz and all those things. So that's what I would highlight there. And then
Yeah, when you think the Assyrian army is the greatest of the on the planet.
Mhm.
I mean, so to know that the Lord has angelic hosts at his disposal.
Mhm.
And how many Assyrians are going to be killed? 185,000 in a single setting. So just kind of like setting the table for
Right.
this grand display of divine power
Mhm.
directly. Not even having to use people.
Right.
It's just it's amazing. Yeah, that can't be missed.
And he makes a good point. He gives two other instances where the Lord intervenes like that, but doesn't connect it to what's happening with the people at this time and what's about to happen in the next
Right.
chapters.
Exactly.
So I would expand on that. I like what he has,
Yes.
but I would build on it.
Here's a question, because I guess I've never thought about it before, but does the phrase Lord of Hosts, is that linked to any specific type of action that the Lord takes in the New Testament? Like the use of, like the when they would say the Lord of Hosts, is that linked to deliverance, or is that linked to... I've never thought about it. I didn't think about it until we just started talking. Here.
So accepting that Zavah is a troop,
Right.
like a military troop, what
Mhm.
kind of
Is there a correlation between the use of that phrase
Right.
as a descriptor of God and his activity
right?
that is being described?
Right. That's a good question.
I think that's what Fadinel is trying to say with these two
Yeah.
supporting examples, but also a word study would help here to get into the Hebrew and
Yeah.
prove that, flesh that out a little bit more.
Mhm.
So I think that's where he's going with it. He picks two good examples, but then, again, to tie it into what's happening here, the connection's not, the circle's not complete.
I specifically remembered a a study note. It was either from the NIV Study Bible or what I'm using now, the ESV Study Bible, where they mentioned that. I'm pretty sure it was NIV because they translated, at least in the NIV 2011, as Lord Almighty. And the reason that they said in the preface to that version was that the term the Lord of Hosts doesn't really mean much to today's readers. I don't think it's, looking back, I don't think it's faithful to the text.
Lord Almighty.
Lord Almighty, yeah.
Yeah.
Because what, Professor, really what it's saying is the Lord of the armies of
Yeah.
Israel, all the
Right.
hosts of heaven,
Yeah.
the commander of the armies.
Yeah.
It just
Which would
depends
be
on
an
the
interesting-
context, right? If it's the heavenly armies or the earthly armies.
Yeah,
But if
Tzavah
he's
could
Lord of
be
hosts,
a
he's Lord-
military troop,
Right.
an individual or a platoon or something, so it's fairly common
Mhm.
in Semitic usage and biblical usage.
But also in light of the political vacuum that you're describing,
Right.
having the Lord presented as the, commander in chief of his armies would be a political statement as well.
Right.
Yes.
And again, tying back to the king,
Right.
earthly king, heavenly king, who's
Mhm.
running the show. I think that's what Isaiah's getting at here. So I would suggest, Fadinel tease that out. Moving on, unless anybody has any more comments on Lord of Hosts. Yes.
I guess as a general domain, as I understand it in the Hebrew Bible, God is bringing judgment either upon the pagan nations or upon Israel directly through angelic combatants. So his mission would be, some kind of conquest. It's certainly not, a defensive posture. It's an aggressive judgment upon either the enemies or Israel itself, because they deserve that. So Israel is protected because the Lord is not only sitting upon the throne, but he has a capable array of combatants who will, execute his judgment upon pagan nations that would be intentioned to harm Israel.
Mhm.
That's what I would say.
And that's the same point with Ahaz being afraid.
Yeah, exactly.
God being in control, and who are you going
Right.
to trust, God or man?
Right. What classic hymn does the transliteration of this word occur in?
Zion.
Yeah.
Oh.
You brought it up before, I think.
Mighty Fortress
Mighty
is our
Fortress
God.
is our
Right. And it's funny, when I was a kid, they say Lord Sabaoth. Lord Sabaoth is his name.
His name.
A mighty fortress is our God, the Lord never failing. Our helper he amidst the flood of mortal ills prevailing. Right, so Lord Sabaoth. No one has any idea what Sabaoth means. But
Right.
Sabaoth is angelic host. And I think today Fred's comment about the 2011 NIV translation, there's this contextualized intention of avoiding any military language or battle or war. Just try to avoid it, but I don't think that's fair to the Bible either. Yeah, so I think that's the intention there.
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, if I did this correctly, the phrase appears 220 times in the Old Testament. The first occasion being 1 Samuel 1:3. Now this man would go up from the city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of Hosts. This is
Yeah.
Samuel's
Mhm.
father in Shiloh. It appears, it seems just a quick glance, Joy, that some of the time the context is a military,
Mhm.
like David challenge or his retort to Goliath. You come
Yeah.
To me, with a sword and spear and a javelin, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel, whom you have taunted. In 15:2, thus says the Lord of hosts, I'll punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. But others, it doesn't seem to relate to a military or an army.
I'm going for the Bosnian stuff.
Okay. So,
And in the context of 1 Samuel, that makes sense because it's the tail end of the judgeship period. Samuel judged Israel 40 years. And the Lord would have been there to defend, to deliver his people after they cried out from the Philistines, the Amorites, and the other five nations mighty more numerous than Israel. And so that makes perfect sense to the way to begin 1 Samuel.
in 13:4 of Isaiah, a sound of tumult on the mountains, like that of many people, a sound of the uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts is mustering the army for battle.
Yeah.
Hua.
Do you want to explain what mustering is?
Mustering is not a Hebrew term that I prepared to study. Mustering is gathering, right?
You know, like when
Mustering.
the boxer, goes to the coroner
Does he
during
muster?
during the fight, and they give him the smelling salts. It is where they just
Oh, is
they
it
just slap
waking
the
you
mustard.
up?
They just slap the mustard on them.
Slap the mustard. See?
Right? It's like the troops are getting down. They're
Let's
getting
muster them.
depressed. Muster the
Muster them.
troops.
Okay.
Yeah, mustering is
Get
a
those
military
old
gathering.
It is the
factory
Hebrew term. I didn't know.
lines open.
It's from the French to show.
It is?
Yeah. Serendipity wasn't even used until 1750.
We digress.
That's when I was in school. That's what
1750.
Serendipity.
Pre-revolution, pre-American Revolution.
I would never have known that. Serendipity.
If you look up etymology now, Google's got a great feature where it actually shows over a historical graph over time of historical usages.
It's pretty neat.
And it didn't really pick up until the 50s or later.
Wow.
So Fred, what was your last comment? I had a related comment. What did you say?
In Isaiah 13:4, the Lord of hosts is mustering his army for battle. That was my
Right. Okay.
yeah. But or it could have been the idea of mustering is a military gathering. It's a
Mhm.
gathering of
Right.
military. You never talk about federal employees mustering.
Right. Right.
You know,
It
the
has-
army's mustering.
has to be military.
Alex,
And that's what the
different.
king was at that time, was
Right.
commander in chief.
Right.
He had to defend Israel and, obey God. But yeah, commander in chief goes all the way back to Israel. So now the Lord of hosts is able to defend us directly. He didn't need man to do that.
But it's the verb asaf,
Right.
to gather or remove.
Okay, anything else on Lord of Hosts? Hold on. So then he talks about the glory of the Lord. This is paragraph 9 of Isaiah's vision, page 7. And he talks about the manifestation of his presence seems too great for the whole universe to contain, so this would be a good place to tie to the theme verb. So he talks about it. He's reflecting what's going on, but it would be good to tie it to the Hebrew.
Well, I'm sorry, where are you right now?
Page 7. When I say I'm calling them the numbers of paragraphs, but they're not numbered anywhere in his paper. So it's page 7, paragraph 3.
It starts with a
The
study.
indescribable character.
The indescribable character.
No, I think it's the previous one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm mixing things up. Glory.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. I jumped ahead. So, and I think I have the wrong number here. The glory of the Lord. Okay. So he gives us a little bit about the glory. I found the sentence confusing. The manifestation of the glory of the Lord is associated with himself. I'm not sure what he means there. And then when he goes into this next section, that's where he could tie that to the Hebrew and maybe connect the glory, the fullness, maybe connect all that a little bit more clearly. Alex?
I thought what he was trying to say was the use of the phrase "glory of the Lord" is necessarily associated with a theophany. I thought that's what he was trying to say. Was in verse 3 when it says, "Holy, holy,
really?
holy is the Lord of hosts; the whole earth is full of His glory." I think he's also trying to say glory of the Lord is an idea.
His presence.
Glory means presence, physical
Oh, okay.
presence.
I didn't get that out of this. So if that's what he's driving at, it needs clarification. Any other comments on that section, the glory and?
Well, I would say this in addition. If that is his point,
Mhm.
that when the prophet describes the word kavod married to the term, Yahweh, if he's saying those two things linked together mean the presence of the Lord, which is what I thought he was trying to say, then there needs to be some sort of, if this book is used 86, or if that's used 86 times in the Old Testament, how many times is it used married with the Tetragrammaton? Does the prophet use it married to the Tetragrammaton in other places? Do each of those places represent a manifestation of the Lord Himself?
Right.
Because he's definitely talking about the person
Mhm.
of the Lord, not just the quality of the Lord being glorious, but
Mhm.
saying glory of the Lord means the Lord present.
Mhm.
So I'm just saying if that's the
Great point.
case, then prove that that's what Isaiah is trying to say in using the phrase in verse 3.
Mhm.
And if that's not what he's trying to say, then all of my commentary is superfluous.
Anybody have anything to add? to
He
that?
says it's used 200 times in the Old Testament, but it may only be 86 times in the Word of God as a trinity.
Are you looking at the whole Old Testament or the book of Isaiah? Oh, okay, he's saying,
I don't. EDB
Okay.
says. Yeah, 200 altogether.
okay. So,
But maybe it says only 86, like in reference to God.
mhm. So that definitely is a little bit confusing, that
And I thought
paragraph.
the other thing I thought like Kavod is can be such a wide meaning
Mhm.
that he like fixed on one thing. I thought I thought this was an opportunity for him to get a little bit more in depth.
Right.
To the extent that there's a place where he could. This
Yes.
one, because Kavod could be. It's like the word big. God is big. Well.
Yeah.
Right.
It's big.
Mhm. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, a lot could be done with this. It's so
Right.
central
Yeah.
to
Right.
the passage. I mean,
Mhm.
apart from Malah,
Right.
this is the next most important idea here.
Mhm.
And
And the
the
holiness.
platform of his significance is that he's the Holy One of Israel, right?
Mhm. Right.
So, I mean, to make that connection too would be very significant because that's a uniquely Isaianic term, and they're saying holy, 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 and the platform of his kingship is his holiness, and that enables him to make the proper judgment because he's unclouded by immorality or murkiness with regard to what's right or wrong. He rules with perfect moral judgment and moral character. So yeah, this needs to be developed more,
Mhm.
especially tied back to that Isaianic phrase,
Holy One of Israel.
Yeah.
That's really, truly he's the only author who uses that phrase, the Holy One of Israel.
Yeah, in fact, when it shows up, what is it, 2 Kings, and he shows up, it appears there too.
Where is he?
What's that?
When Isaiah's called for, to give a vision,
Oh,
he uses it in that passage as well.
Where does he use it? Sorry.
In the historical books,
Where does Isaiah use it?
he uses it 26 times, right? 14 times in so-called First Isaiah, 12 times, and so Kadosh Yisrael.
Okay.
It's distinctly Isaianic, right? The Holy One of Israel.
I believe so. It's in,
And then that, I think the one reference in the historical books where Isaiah is called for, it uses the same phrase. It's just so distinctly, but it relates back to this call and
Mhm.
saying
Right.
Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh.
Well,
And you know the Holy of Holies, and they're the angels
And this is
guarding
the
the
temple.
presence of God.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot of connections to make.
Right.
Well, I think this comes down to the idea that how fundamental this incident was in Isaiah's life, because it marks every description he has of the Lord from here on out is seen through the lens of
This experience.
holiness.
Yeah.
Right.
So much so that apparently, I did not know this, but apparently the Second Kings passage, when he's being referenced, is they cannot help but
Right.
use the phrase he
Right.
uses because it's such a. I'm
Oh, yeah.
playing off what Dr. Meyer just said, but
Yeah.
it's such a key
Right.
part of what he
Mhm.
does.
2 Kings 19:20.
Yeah.
And that's the only places it's used in the Bible, right?
And then Isaiah, Jeremiah 50:20.
Yeah, there are a couple usages in Jeremiah.
I see one in Jeremiah.
50:29 and 51.
Is he using them independently? He's written after Isaiah, so.
Again, I'm just looking at the NASB. Jeremiah 50:29 and 51:5 both say against the Holy One of Israel, but the preponderance of the usages are in Isaiah. There's no other prophet besides the two occurrences in
And that's one of the strongest arguments for 1 Isaiah, is that it's used so
Mhm.
evenly over
Mhm.
1st and 2nd Isaiah. So called,
yeah.
It's Babylon does something against the Holy One of Israel. Usually good trials.
Okay.
I'll pull it up.
Thank you. Thank you.
By the way, I erred when I said that it was a soft. That's the colon right before that. It's actually, the word is pakad. To attend to, visit, muster, or appoint.
A point,
So,
yeah, a point, yeah. God.
A point, yeah. So, this is for muster, pakad.
Sorry. Okay.
You're dragging this out, aren't you?
No, would you like me to speed it up?
Just kidding. No, we're commenting a lot. It's good. I mean,
Yeah.
Fadinel is getting an excellent critique, but we're
Mhm.
trying to help him
Mhm.
in this side.
So I'll pick up a little speed here. The paragraph 10, bottom of page 7. I like this connection he makes with the smoke. Probably again a personal thing when I looked at this chapter a long, long time ago. It's obviously just smoke from the altar, but there's a lot of connections you can make with the temple. And he connects this with the Lord descending in fire, and this, the Lord's glory and power and greatness and all these things. He's pulling this together a little bit in this paragraph, the rest of this paragraph. And in the last sentence of this paragraph, he says he is also controlling everything in the universe.
Yeah.
So he's pulling some of the themes together here. I think you could overlook the smoke because it doesn't seem that important, but it's just reinforcing the scene, I think, of the altar and the cleansing and the fire and the angels and just everything there. So
It's very multidimensional in
Right.
terms of the sensory experience.
yeah,
You can almost smell, what's happening. He wants
Mhm.
to really, communicate the vividness of what he saw. I mean,
mhm.
it reminds me of, Moses going up on Mount Sinai.
Right. That's what he puts in. He puts in here that reference.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then when I did this, I did not compare my old study notes with everything Fadinel did. But I looked up all the places where there's smoke around the Lord, and it's actually more than I
Yeah.
would have thought before I started to study it. So it's interesting. It's probably a little off. I mean, that maybe is for a book, not a paper. But I like that he mentions it and he connects it with the Lord on the mountain.
Does he mention incense here? The incense
Let me
smoke?
see.
I don't think so.
No, he's.
Because if it's the temple, remember, that's the last
Mhm.
piece of furniture before the
Right.
veil, will be the incense
Yeah.
altar. And so to really, on analog with the troops being mustered, the high priest's senses will be heightened to know that he's entering into the presence of God. And plus, Hebrews says that they represent the prayers of the saints. And
Mhm.
it's a sweet smelling aroma
Mhm.
to God. So I would tend to see the incense probably there with the temple, right?
Mhm. Right. And he takes the fire from the altar
Right.
with the tongs,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I was thinking of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole picture of what's
Right.
going on in the temple. So I like that he addressed that. And then, let's see, it's just a little summary. He's, he's getting into vision of self now, and he talks about the shift from 5 chapters of talking about their sin to looking at his own sin. So, I think that, of course, is critical with the call and Isaiah needing to be cleansed, the people needing to be judged, Isaiah needing to be judged. So he gets into that a little bit here. And he addresses woe to me pretty well and talks about how that means a calamity is coming, discusses the Hebrew a little bit here. This is on page 8. There are a few things that are a little bit confusing here, and the paragraph gets really long. Well, not any longer than some of mine, but I thought it could be broken up a little bit. He has a few things in here that I just didn't understand. The expression to be cut, I know he means off, not cut of, but the expression to be cut off should be considered as being silent. I'm not sure what that means. And then the reaction of the prophet Isaiah to his personal relationship to God represents an inward liberation due to his self-consciousness. I think I sort of know what he's getting at, but that needs to be restructured a little bit. He's talking about Isaiah understanding his own sin. So it just needs a little work. But he's got the point, the right of Isaiah understanding after 5 chapters of talking about their sin, talking about his own. So, does anybody have any other observations on that?
He's a little paragraph. It's Holly.
Hollian, yes.
I thought he could,
Said it's Holly.
the woe stuff was, I thought it was interesting. I thought he might want to, I don't know, I thought he could do more with the woe portion, and I think he should break that up. And, because it does start a whole, there's probably a whole strain of thought that sort of gets started.
Like that could be its own paragraph and be beefed up.
So, I mean, maybe not the beef up to me. I thought there could have been more to it. I mean, because we talked about Dr. Meyer and Hagel about woe, and there was you had a lot to say on it. I don't remember everything what you did have to say, but there was a lot. So, I don't know. I mean, to me, I thought you could have done a little bit more there.
Yeah, especially when he brings it back to himself. Because typically the woe oracles are directed at disobedient nations, but to be indicting and say, woe to me, I wonder if is that a hotbox? I mean, it's,
I don't
or
know.
it's, but I mean, it's not that common. I mean,
24 times in the New Testament. They're on about woe to me.
Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, oi by itself is 24.
Woe by itself, yeah. Woe to me is, maybe.
So I like in the next paragraph he starts to talk about this and then shifts to the next idea, but he says, that the prophet was so terrified that he hasn't worded it quite this way, but I think this is what he means, that he considers himself a dead man. So that I think belongs in the paragraph before with the woe.
But I mean, in terms of what prophets do, they have the woe oracles.
Right.
And even
To the other
Jesus,
people,
right?
Right.
Woe to you, Chorazin.
Right.
Woe to you, Bethsaida. If the miracles were performed in, Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. So, can you do a
It's
search
not-
on the string?
It's not a hot box. It's using the cup.
That string. Oi me.
Isaiah 24, Jeremiah 6, and there's a bunch of woe to us as well.
Right. But woe to me is what? On those 3 times?
Yeah, there's probably more.
Okay, but
Jeremiah 10.
it's just a very humble thing to say
Mhm.
that he's got to be the holiest guy around, but yet still he has this self deprecation, which is, I think, to me, very significant.
Yeah,
should be explored.
He does explore it. I think it just needs to be restructured a little bit, but like he says, he was so terrified because he had seen God, he considered himself as someone who was about to be destroyed. So,
Right,
he's
but I'm saying in terms of the
pronouncing it on himself.
the the distinctiveness of that usage by Isaiah here
Mhm.
and the paucity of it in the rest of Scripture.
Okay,
you know,
compare it.
In terms of this
Compare that
being
no one
really a
else said.
distinct thing
Got
in
it.
this passage.
Okay.
Woe is me.
Right.
Relatively speaking, I mean, even if it does appear a couple other times, it's still relatively uncommon to
Right.
apply to oneself,
Right.
especially upon one's initial call, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Joy, your question or your comment about to be cut off, the underlying word there is dema, which is, again, 15 occurrences, and it typically means to cease or to destroy or to be ruined or to ruined, but I think his point was there in the nifal, it's the passive, to be ruined, or again, to be cut off.
Oh.
That-
Mhm.
That's what he's trying to get at. is
Yeah, so
this
that needs a little
passive sense of the
clarity.
word. So, I mean, it would ordinarily mean to be ruined, but
What is it?
I
Does
am
it have
cut
something
off.
to do with being silent, though? He says it.
well, I mean,
In what verse?
maybe he's saying it's like when you're talking and
Bottom
somebody
of
cuts
page
you off.
8.
It's, you know,
Um,
I don't know. I don't see this. Well, there is a one time in
Not
the
verse.
NI and the NASB it's translated as silenced.
Okay. So Fadinel says the expression to be cut off should be considered as being silent. That's what I didn't understand. He says that at the bottom of page 8.
Yeah.
So maybe he's saying like be put to an end or something? Put
Only in
silence because you're killed because of the woe?
Zephaniah 1:11, it's translated in the NAS as something of Canaan, the inhabitants, hang on. All the people of Canaan are cut off or silenced. The NAS says are silenced.
Mm.
So that's,
It's just a little confusing in the,
yeah.
so he could, clarify what he means there.
The other thing I wanted to mention that we skipped over, did he mention, Joy, whether or not Shesh Kenaphim are six-winged pairs
Mm-mm.
or six-winged? Because I think that will be, it's generally assumed that it's six wings, but if it's Shesh Kenaphim, it's six two-wings. So I would think it's six-winged pairs, so a lot of our translations would need to be modified.
Mm. He doesn't go into
He
that.
doesn't go into that. Yeah. Did you comment on that in your?
Mm-mm.
No. Yeah, because I think Kenaphim by itself is a winged pair.
Mhm.
And so Shesh Kenaphim would be six
Six
winged
winged
pairs,
pairs.
which would be 12 wings, which
Yes.
no translations really take it that way, or even have a footnote.
Mm. So Fadinel could have breaking ground by Justin.
Yeah, I think it should be addressed and explored, because it's something you notice when you look at the Hebrew that you wouldn't notice by looking at the English. Thank you.
Okay, so page 9, he starts to talk about Isaiah's relief at having his mouth cleansed. This just stood out to me because it sounds tentative. He says this may signify that the purification is divine. It has to be divine. It's from God.
Right, yeah.
So I would state that strongly and definitively. And then it sounds a little bit more strong later in the paragraph, but not here. So I would change that. And then he goes into a discussion about a cake baked on stones on page 10. And the connections aren't clear to me. He's talking about the uses of the word, but I can't tell what it has to do with the passage. So I would maybe drop that word study or make the connection clearer. And then this is just something probably he didn't intend to say. He says this is a common noun, but it's only found twice. So it can't be a common noun, so change that. There's a font issue, if you have it printed out, you'd notice that. I'm trying to move a little faster, so does anybody have anything to add to some of these paragraphs?
So far, I found two other occurrences of the phrase that's translated, woe is me.
Just two others?
Oi, li, yeah, so far.
I see
Four?
4 total.
Isn't that amazing? Where are they?
Isaiah 6:5, 24:16, Jeremiah 10:19, and 15:10.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's some more than us, too.
Okay.
What
might
was,
be also-
what was,
Which one was what? The four of them again?
yeah,
Isaiah 6:5 here,
Yeah.
and then 24:16,
Right.
10:19. Sorry, Jeremiah 10:19, and Jeremiah 15:10.
okay, Jeremiah 10:19.
Are those
That
the
was one I
ones?
didn't have.
And Jeremiah's the only other one that mentions Holy One of Israel?
Correct.
That's
Well,
all-
it's the psalmist does, and it's twice used in, I think once in First Kings, once in Second Kings.
But there's a lot of woe is us and woe is you too. That's what, and he frequently uses the
Yeah,
word
but, yeah,
God.
But the,
yeah, but us is different than me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he's a representative of Israel, of course, you know, God is gonna judge Israel. He always get, yeah, but I mean, the fact that he makes us sing it. The other thing that's interesting here is that in terms of the temple motif, you know, you have the bronze laver there for this, but God cleanses him directly. That's what a special role Isaiah had, is that God, you know, just uses that seraph to touch his lips directly. So what a radically special relationship he had with
Mhm.
God. I think it's very significant.
The other thing that I studied when I was looking at this and looked at Isaiah having his mouth cleansed is the connections with the other prophets. So Ezekiel eats the scroll.
Right.
And Daniel has experience where, you know, the angel appears before him and he's struck down, he can't speak.
Mm.
So, you know, I think the connection with being a prophet and needing your mouth cleansed is not
Right.
just Isaiah, that's
Exactly.
consistent.
Hmm.
They're going to speak the word of the Lord, so they need their
Yeah.
mouth cleansed, so
That's good.
that's just. And then they can't not speak, like Jeremiah tries not to speak,
Mhm.
but he has
Right.
to because
Exactly.
the Lord's called him to it. So since this is about his call, I thought
Right.
those connections would be good to bring in.
Right. Have people ever seen a cake baked on stones? They just throw the stuff right on the stone and it cooks. It's actually very good. I've had that. It's very tasty. You just throw the dough right on the stone and it cooks. And
Is it in an oven, or is it just
no,
on a
it's
hot
just
stone?
there's a fire there, but it's just a stone.
It's
You
more
throw
like a
it right in.
pancake, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's just
than
like
a convection
pita
oven.
bread or something, but it's
Hmm.
quite common. It's tasty too, though.
A tasty cake.
Nobody's doing, yeah.
So this paragraph, he has a lot of different passages drawn in about how these words are used in different places, but it just doesn't really come together as far as what the connections are. And then going on, this is.
And one good thing, like on page 9, I mean, if you look at a page in your paper, and there's really no discernible Hebrew on the page, that, for a Hebrew-based paper, that's probably not a good thing. So, mainly what we're looking for is original research.
So page 10, well, that's what I was talking about. There's Hebrew but not tied in. And then this, let's see. He has wherever this word is used in the Septuagint, but the word is Hebrew. So I thought he should give the Greek if he's going to say that, or explain that, you know, how it's used the same or differently, but not have it stated just like this. That looked funny to
Right.
me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can have the Greek and then in parentheses have the Hebrew.
Right, so that would be a good way to fix it. And then, let's see. He talks about the results. His sins taken away. He's purged. Now he can speak. This is where he could beef that up. He talks about Psalm 24 and the holy place, ascending to the holy place. So that's a good connection. I like the connection with the other prophets and their
Mhm.
mouths
Yes.
more because they're prophets, and I think that connection's clearer. But Psalm 24 is good, ascending the holy hill.
Yeah, so you has clean hands and a pure heart.
Mhm.
So
And
the
this is a
purity-
clean mouth.
purity, yeah.
So they're connected, but
Right.
yeah.
What's the date of Psalm 24?
Date of Psalm
Yeah.
24? I'm not sure of what the date is.
That would be interesting. So David. So 1000 BC, before Isaiah.
saying he's not interpreting that as the Trinity. So I wouldn't capitalize that. That's just a minor detail. But if he's making a point of it not being the Trinity, then this would make it seem the other way, maybe. Then the font switches again.
Yeah, and tying this back to Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. You know, you have to at least mention John Calvin, along with other well-known Christian exegetes, took that to be a reference to the angelic court.
Right.
You know, that God is speaking to, you know, those in attendance around him. So it's at least, you know, needs to be mentioned, because it is a common view out there.
Okay, and then, let's see, I don't have a page number here, but I know I've noted the font switches. He starts to talk about whether or not God really was calling Isaiah, and this just, I think God was definitely calling Isaiah. I've heard this, I mean, it's kind of strange, God saying, who will go for us? But obviously the only person privy to the vision is Isaiah. So I would go that way. I think he talks about someone, does he refer, I've forgotten, that he refers to, okay, yeah, that John D.W. Watts thinks that the messenger would normally be one of the heavenly host. I guess
So he mentions that, but he doesn't mention the us being the angelic court.
no.
Yeah. They go together. But Watts is very scholarly, so I mean, he's heading down that path, as he would probably in Genesis 1 as well.
So that, what's your thought on that though? Is he, when he says who will go for us, is it, I mean, it almost sounds, and maybe Fadinel doesn't mean to sound like this, I'm not sure. It sounds like Fadinel is saying that it's just sort of coincidental that Isaiah overheard that and happened to answer. And I think it's I think Isaiah is clearly called. I think God, I mean, every time God calls someone in the Old Testament, he is the actor. He is the one who goes and says, you're mine, you go do this.
Right. I mean, is there biblical evidence that God selects from among several capable angels who's going to be his messenger? Because angel and messenger are the same word. Is that scriptural? Yeah, I mean, even in Job and the destruction and the historical books and so forth. So that scenario being typical could be raised, but then this one being unique, in that clearly, Isaiah is the one that God has in mind to respond to this.
Right.
So it's non-customary in that regard that a human is brought into the picture, and he's going to be the one, not the angels, who is going to bring forth this message. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay, so just summarizing here, he talks about the challenges of Isaiah's commission. He talks about two imperatives and two infinitives. So addressing the Hebrew, I think we're on page 13. Let me make sure. I don't have a page number here either. So I suggested that he study this and see, since he's brought up these this grammatical construction of see, is this used other places? Is there something else he can say about what the significance of that is? Because he mentions that it's there, but doesn't really expand on why that would be significant. So that's something where he could draw the Hebrew out a little bit more. And then this was interesting, a debate about, is this just a warning and there's no real chance of turning back? Is it a warning and there is a chance, or it's just condemnation and there's no chance? I thought that Fadinel, it needs to be rephrased a little bit but he answers that, of course, someone can repent. But that's not going to stop the judgment, but people can still repent. I think that's what he's trying to say here, which is good, because that speaks to the remnant too, which he didn't get to. So theological contributions are coming soon.
Oh, that's his, not yours, I see.
No, that's mine. He's gonna finish the paper. So he doesn't have theological contribution. He has a heading for that, but doesn't have the text yet. And then
And
conclusions.
you recommend that he have more than one?
Theological
Oh, yeah,
contribution.
you put it in singular, yeah.
Oh, I assumed that he was gonna have more than one. And then the conclusion I did not specifically comment on because he is not finished. So he has started a conclusion, but I didn't see the sense in critiquing that when it's incomplete. So, we've really hit all these, but, it needs more Hebrew analysis, it needs the bigger themes clarified and drawn out more. These are the opportunities for perfection that I stole that from Garrett because I like that. Needs a title, some grammar and punctuation issues, which like I said, I'm gonna give him something on that or given suggestions. And then what's well done, the background information, and it could be, that could be carried through with these issues like word posts and things like that. The flow is clear, I understand, where he's going based on his outline and things like that. And he has some good insights about some of these things, which like we've touched on, they could be beefed up, but he's touched on them. So, and I like some of the connections he draws from other passages, like that, the earthquake and the smoke at Mount Sinai and things like that. So, that is all I have. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I think you did a very thorough job.
Try to,
Is,
try to speed up a
the
little
part
bit.
about the send me stuff, is that something that, is generally felt to be of hyper-theological significance?
Hineni,
Yeah, well, in any shalachni.
Shalachni,
Shalachim.
Shalachim,
Hineni shalachim.
right. Well, I would say yes. That's what, now my mind's gone blank, but we talked about that a lot. Here
Well, I
am
mean,
sending-
really, what I see here is the central issue, and he kinda, he's around it here is, okay. Uzziah had a great start, he was a good king,
Right,
but he was unholy.
right.
Therefore, his kingship was cut off before it should have been. He disappointed a lot of people because he was unholy. So who's able to really take over from there in a way that will not let the fortunes of Israel decline? The one who's sitting upon the throne high and lifted up, who is completely holy. If Isaiah is going to represent him as his ambassador, he must be holy. Therefore, he says, "Oily, woe to me." The Lord touches his lips, and it's because the Lord is holy and Isaiah is holy that they can witness to God's plan to a rebellious northern kingdom who's going to go into exile in 722, and then a southern kingdom who's approaching exile in the terminal year of Isaiah's ministry in 680. So, it's all around God's control. Malah, malah, malah is wielded because he's holy. And Isaiah can only have influence because his lips have been touched with the coal directly by God. So that's what I like to see. Always bringing it back to the immediate context. Uzziah died. He died of leprosy. I mean, what greater emblem of unholiness can you have than leprosy? And then he has that vision of Israel. They're leprous, right? I see a man who's beaten around with sores. He's like a drunkard.
Right.
That's a
They're
picture
oozing
of
and he can't be healed.
a leprous person, right? So here's a holy God calling a holy Isaiah, making him holy, to preach a message of holiness to a leprous nation who's reflecting their human king. Isaiah reflects the divine holy king. So I'd like to see more of that, you know, immediate context, Isaiah specific Hebrew than, you know, just kind of a generalist statement. So that's what makes our ministry here distinct, is that we're really, you know, context, and always relating it back to that.
Was leprosy deemed to be a sign of unholiness? I know
Well,
it
I
was
mean,
for uncleanness.
Yeah, I mean, so if a person had leprosy, they weren't deemed to be, you know, an unholy person, but
Mhm.
you could certainly become ritually unclean by
Yeah.
getting too close to them.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is, the fact that God struck Uzziah with leprosy
Mhm.
is a direct result of his sin. In Isaiah, he's given visions of the nation as a leprous person. That certainly depicts their sinfulness. So that's where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
Done?
Are we taking comments from the floor now?
I think, are you taking comments from the
Yes,
floor?
certainly.
Recognizing that this was not complete, and that Fadinel had a family tragedy, I didn't go into as much detail as you did, Joy. Again, I thought his introduction to historical contrasts were brief but useful, and understanding where Isaiah fits within God's historical timeline. And it was pretty good in setting the stage. I felt that was helpful. I like the overall, this framework that got Isaiah's vision, Isaiah's commission. And I thought he made some good exegetical and commentary points. I did think from a format perspective, the Hebrew text it would have been useful to have the Hebrew text alongside the English text, of course, and we've made that comment with other papers. I made a comment about his transliterations. I said that if they're used, they should follow a more or less standard convention. And I gave him an example for kadosh rather than, as he kind of spelled it out, quadosh.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you do see that in older literature, but yeah, you can't use that.
Yeah. I think again, it's pretty obvious that the conclusion could benefit by being expanded. And lastly, we may have talked about this. You may have mentioned this before I came in. There really was no commentary at all on poetry or the poetic aspects. The word poetry does not even appear, or poetic does not appear once in the paper. That's a big.
Talked about one chiasm. I don't remember what it was, but there was one chiasm.
Right. Yeah. But in terms of
Yeah.
The line expanding.
the line
Now,
expanding.
a lot of this isn't, well, at least in my Bible, it's not poetry. No, I don't. 9 through 13, I think, is poetry, but 1 through 8. Now, you mentioned that 1 really should be probably, but there isn't as much poetry in this passage as there is in the rest of our papers,
Mhm.
unless
Yeah,
our Bibles are
if he's
interpreting wrong.
taking it that way,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have a statement that
Okay.
I'm taking this as primarily prose. But it needs to be, Thomas didn't set it out as poetry. And certainly, the historical setting in verse 1 is not poetry, but then seeing the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe was filling the temple, and you would have to at least explore the poetic possibilities of this nestled in a book that's an oracle. And of course, not to state that it didn't happen, but just to state that that's, the genre that Isaiah is writing in primarily in the book. Yeah, good comments.
Anybody else? I know we've all commented a lot as we've gone, so I see heads shaking, so I will be finished.
Okay, excellent. Good job. Good job. Okay, yeah, thank you. I think that's quite a bit. So Fadinel will really appreciate